Okay, so yeah, we're here to talk about water management, and basically this is just a simple strategy that you can use for understanding water in your business, and it'll help you sort of take projects forward as well, which I think is really important. So um, a little bit of a look of why water is important. Um, the I'm Total Water Solutions, but we're the commercial team at Northumbrian Water and Essex and Suffolk Water, and we service 4.2 million customers in those two operating areas. So obviously you can imagine water is very important to us. Um, Water is normally measured in metered cubes or cube meters. It's the same thing. It's 1,000 liters. So if you imagine 500 bottles of your standard pop in a 2 liter bottle, that's what you get as a meter cubed. And we charge approximately £1.24 for that meter cubed of water. So basically, it works out you're paying less than half a pence for a litre. So if we kind of compare that against your traditional bottled water, particularly if you're on the motorway, you'd be paying a lot more for that. And that can actually add challenges when we're trying to implement water strategies within businesses, because the return on investment can be a little bit less than, say, energy or gas, which is obviously kind of from a unit price tends to be a bit more expensive. Um, Water's precious, and that's the reason why we really need to look after that. In fact, there's only about 2.5% of all the water on the planet that's technically usable for us as a sort of drinking water. You can see that little image on the slide there, which gives you an idea of all of the water on the planet, and then the tiny bit that we can kind of use. A lot of that 2.5% as well is kind of it's trapped in sort of permafrost and things like that in the Arctic and Antarctic. So again, that's not technically accessible. So it just gives you an idea of we sometimes get this illusion that because we're on a planet full of water that we've got this kind of infinite resource. But in fairness, the fish tend to get a bit of a better deal than we do from a water perspective. Um, in 2018, the data on daily demand in England was about 14 billion litres of water per day. So that kind of gives you an idea of the scale of what water companies are kind of outputting on a daily basis. And that's one of the reasons why actually it comes out quite cheap as a unit cost. Certainly when you're looking at it via litre, is because we do it on mass volume, and that's all the water companies, obviously in the UK. We do have challenges from climate change, as you'll all be aware. I don't think you can turn on the news nowadays and not hear something about sort of climate change and things of that nature. And what they're estimating is by about 2050, would need an additional 4 billion litres of water per day just to satisfy sort of the current population. So it just kind of sets a little bit of an idea of water and how it's used. So, do you have a water strategy? It's a really important question to ask, and basically the reason we ask that question is the likelihood of it is if you don't have a water management strategy in place, it's likely that you're using more water than you have to. And obviously, we've talked about it being a precious resource, but we're all businesses and organizations that have to manage costs and budgets and things of that nature. So when you get to it, it's like, yes, it can have an effect on the environment. If we're kind of wasting water, and we'll all be guilty of it from time to time. I remember growing up as a kid, and brushing your teeth with the taps running on full bore was an absolutely normal thing to do. And I kind of remember it starting when I was probably about 8, where people were kind of talking about, oh, you should turn the tap off when you're brushing your teeth. It's a good way to save water. Whereas nowadays, my kids, my son's about that age, and he is sort of the first one to turn the tap off because it's been ingrained, but it does take quite a while. But yeah, it can affect the environment if we're not being careful with the water that we use. Um, it also increases operational costs. So depending on the type of organisation you're on, I know we've got quite a diverse range of people on the call today. If you're using water that you don't need, it's just an additional cost that you're adding to your business or your organization. If you're a profit generating organization as well, I know we've got a few local authorities on today. it's going to reduce your overall profit. So not only does it increase cost, but it can start trimming away at your profit margins as well. So that's something that's important that we need to kind of pay attention to as any sort of good business. Um, it also generally sort of indicates that this sounds quite harsh and I don't mean it to be, but there'll be a lack of awareness on the usage or the asset conditions of certain water systems as well. It's not always the case, but it's an indicator that if you're not thinking about it, then generally there's just a general lack of awareness around that as well. Whereas if we can bring it to the forward, have a real strategy around it, then people are concentrating on it and it just naturally gets a bit better. I'm sure we could probably put that into our own lives as well. Last year, obviously, the price of electricity and gas went through the roof, and we were all a little bit more conscious about just turning that thermostat down a degree because we're now paying attention to it. Whereas maybe a few years before, we didn't have quite as keen an eye on it. So it's a similar principle. The other thing to think about as well is we talk about water and water companies are sort of obviously talk about it quite a bit. But the thing that sometimes gets left off the end of that is effluent. It may be applicable to some of you, not others, but it's something that can often be missed when we're talking about water strategies. Is we think about potable, drinkable water or possibly processed water, but we're not thinking about the water that then comes out of our organizations and businesses, and is that being dealt with in the right way and the most cost effective way as well? So got some examples here, which just sort of kind of bring to light some of the things that I've just mentioned. So the first one was we had a leaking toilet in a primary school in Cleveland, which is in the northeast of England. The toilet was overflowing, but it was you'll know nowadays that you get sort of toilet systems now where everything's nicely boxed in. There isn't a pipe sticking out the wall anymore. Where if it was overflowing, you would see it dripping, and you think, oh, there's a problem there, and it sort of gives you that indication. A lot of the time, it's sort of re-tapped back into the drain. So if it is overflowing, it just effectively just keeps pouring out. Um, um, they, as an organization, were getting billed every 6 months or so. So they didn't get a bill for 6 months, at which point, obviously, they kind of they noticed that obviously things were going up. Um, on that, if that had gone for a 12 month for the level of waste that was coming out of that one, it would have cost them about £5,200 a year, or 3.8 million litres of water, just to kind of give it a bit of context. I mean, £5,200 a year, I think, is pretty much big to anybody. But that was one toilet. So it's just these little things need to have the attention paid to them to make sure that these aren't happening. We had another one which was a large industrial estate. It was a big leak on their main. It was still operating. It was like nobody was necessarily complaining of a massive lack of pressure or flow and things of that nature, but this leak was quite large. And they got a bill. And if I believe correctly, I believe that industrial estate had been recently taken over by a new land manager. So when they got the bill in and it was 400% higher than what they were expecting from the due diligence that they'd done, they were obviously quite shocked. The lick rate was actually 200 litres per minute. So going back to our bottles of pop analogy, you're looking at 100 bottles of Coca-Cola spewing out of a pipe every minute. Obviously, that is one of the larger ones that I've seen, but it is something that can happen. The waste on that one. So that if it hadn't have been, luckily I think these were on quarterly, so it wasn't quite as bad. But if they had gone a year without noticing that or paying attention to it, it would have cost them, about 137,000 that year in just water costs. And that comes out at 105 million litres, which again is like a huge volume of water. Um, this is where I sort of go on to kind of the effluent side of things as well, where we've got to pay attention to that. So we did some work with a food manufacturing plant. Um, the uh, the overused power washers, or the were at this one, they were kind of chasing a pea around the factory floor and sort of jettisoning it down a drain, which isn't ideal. And then we even caught somebody kind of trying to power hose half a chicken down the drain, instead of just picking it up and putting it down the drain, down in a bin. Sorry. So again, it's kind of brings behaviour into this a little bit as well. Basically, what we did to affect this was we screwed down the drain traps so they couldn't take the drain traps out to try and force bigger bits down, because that's what they're there for. Minimizing those sort of those bits going down the drain, which increases the effluent charge on the back end, which I mentioned just before. We removed the power washers, and what we did was we replaced them with bin stations. So they had brushes and brush pans and plastic bags and things, and it went in the bin as it should have done, and not down the drain. Um, from that, we actually reduced the water consumption by 36%, but we reduced their effluent charge by 40%. And that was actually a bigger charge than the water that we're using. So although it looks kind of similar on a percentage, the actual benefit for that business was it saved that much in its effluent charges that they were chuffed to bits, to be honest. So just some a bit odd examples, but it just gives you an idea of some small things that can cost quite a bit, and then some really big ones that can cost quite a lot. And then also just don't forget about effluent in this process if it's applicable to your business or your organization. So where to start? So this is where we're going to talk about this sort of like simple strategy that you can kind of use to kind of form some thoughts about your organization, what we do, and what could we put in place. Or maybe you've got a project that you're looking to take forward, and this might be just a nice simple thing to kind of go through as you're doing that to start forming some ideas. So excuse me. As with most things, we need to kind of understand what it is we're trying to do. So understand. So you need to really kind of, and this is the bit where we tend to rush in because we're full of enthusiasm, but it's kind of the first time where you need to stop and really think about what it is that you're trying to achieve, and kind of really define your objectives. It's a really important stage, which more often than not, if it doesn't go right, this is the bit where it kind of went wayward at the very beginning. So you need to pay attention to this bit. Um, it's also the time to start getting that buy-in from senior managers. There's nothing worse than having a really good idea. Like this is going to really bring some positive change, and it's I'm enthused about it, and you don't have that buy-in, and when you get it to the senior managers, it just it's not on their agenda at that point. So getting buy-in from senior managers and also bringing it up um, uh, to an awareness level for them, so they're aware of what you're trying to achieve nice and early on, is really beneficial to help your project move forward. Um, at that point, you can also find out whether or not there's a limit in scope that you need to take into consideration. Maybe it's due to budget or resource, or depends on what the project is. But if you've involved some senior managers there, and it doesn't need to be necessarily the decision maker at that point, it could be the manager in between you and the decision maker, perhaps potentially, if that's where you sit in the organization, getting those people involved so they start talking about it and getting that message filtered up, so that when it comes around, you say, this is what I want to do and this is my plan. You've already got that initial buy-in or initial awareness, which can just help smooth things and move things along nicely. Um, you need to also understand your business's relationship with sort of water and effluent. So as part of this understanding, it's well worth going to speak to the people who are maybe directly involved with it. If you're a local authority and you're managing um, a a leisure park, swimming pool, jacuzzis, things of that nature. Go and speak about what's the problems, what's the issues, where could we make the savings. A lot of the time, and I'm certainly guilty of this myself. Some of the best bits of information you get out of the people who are like boots on the ground. If that's not you, it's best to ask them, because you'll find a golden nugget in there somewhere which can really make a difference. So understanding that from not only the managerial level but also from the people on the ground doing the work, you can really get some good insight from that as well. So don't miss that out as part of your understanding of what you're trying to do. And that again, all these things can redefine your objectives, and sort of change what it is you're trying to achieve, or maybe improve it, or maybe come up with somewhere you're like, right, that's not going to work and I need to rethink these things through. So it's kind of constantly evolving. This is a good way to kind of think about a nice little flow chart when you're thinking about that relationship with water in your business. So, how does water come into the business? And from that, it could be it just comes in from a main, but actually, do you have any alternative supplies? We operate Essex and Suffolk Water as well, and there's a lot of boreholes and things like that down in that area of the country. So sometimes people are getting supplied by a main and supplemented by boreholes, or sometimes they run completely off that. So that's always a thing to kind of keep at the front of your mind. And then, do you have any sort of rainwater or grey water recycling processes in your business, which again that needs to be taken into account when you're thinking about all this, because if we make a change here, it can have an effect further down the chain. So we need to be aware of that. Are you in an area of strained resource? We're pretty fortunate in most of our areas where we've got quite an abundance, particularly in the north, in that Essex and Suffolk region, particularly in the Suffolk region. We've got a rainfall pattern of similar to sort of Israel. So you can imagine it doesn't get a lot of rainfall. So, if you wanted to put in a massive process that was going to drain lots of water out the system, you need to make sure that you've thought about that before you do it, and you've had your chats with your water company just to make sure the resource is available. Once you've got water coming in, it's like, well, what happens to that water in your business or your organization? Is it simply used for domestic purposes? You've got staff in a building and they need to be able to make cups of tea and have drinks and potentially have cooking of food, toilets and getting rid of waste, things of that nature. At this point as well, it's really important to think about variations. If you think about a school, which is always the classical sort of thing to go to, the kind of they're open during the day, they're not open at night, and then during the 6 weeks holidays, generally they're shut for 6 weeks, so the demand drops off quite significantly. So that's something to bear in mind when you're thinking about these processes. And is it used in production? So we do quite a lot of work with industrial customers who are using water either as a coolant or possibly a washdown facility, or even in the product itself. If you think of like quite a lot of chemicals, it's the quite water based, and water makes up a good proportion of that. So that's another thing that you need to bear in mind. Out of all of that, is there any sort of effluence created? Again, I'll keep stressing the point because it is the bit that tends to get forgotten about. Is there any effluent created on the back end of the processes that you've got in place? And if so, how are you disposing of those? And is that being done in the right way as well? That needs to form part of your understanding, because that could have implications on the way that you proceed going forward. Um, Once you've kind of done all your understanding, you've built your ideas, you've got your objectives set out, you know what it is that you want to achieve, you need to start collecting data. That's the next key point. So we'll move on. So obviously, naturally, collecting data is the next point. So most billing data is biannually done. It's twice a year for most organizations, unless you've specified with your water retailer that you want more. It's generally twice a year is what you'll get. Um, so that overall usage is valuable. It's valuable to know you can compare year on year. But obviously with most things, the more data you've got in a usable form, I would stress that, because you can have too much data. But once you've got more data, you can generally make you've got more insight to what's going on. We'll all hear about data-driven decisions and things of that nature. This is certainly one of them. So if your resources allow you, you'll probably know where the meter is for your particular site, or a particular building, perhaps. There's nothing to stop you, lifting the lid and taking a meter reading, putting that in an Excel spreadsheet, and you could just log that. You could potentially do that daily, weekly, or monthly, but obviously that depends on what resources you've got in the building. Normally people have got jobs, and if you try and add on a meter reading every day, that would probably be quite cumbersome. But the more data points that you've got around sort of your water consumption, the better, really, because then you can start teasing out those variations, differences, and things of that nature. Even better, you could look at something like automated meter reading, AMR. It's a bit like smart metering in your house for gas and electricity. It's a bolt-on, connects to the meter, takes readings, generally chunks them into 15-minute data blocks, and then you've got your trend data, so you can see consumption over time. That'll help you sort of define things like what we mentioned in the last slide around is there any variations in your water consumption. Again, school, you wouldn't expect to see water being used overnight. If it is being used overnight, there's something running, or you've got a leak generally. So that's really important, and it gives you that higher level of insight, because it's reading 24 hours a day. So whereas your daily, weekly, monthly ones would be great, and is certainly an improvement on just an annual or a biannual figure. 15-minute data is going to really give you that data where you can really start looking at things. Um, you may also want to look at things like submetering. That can be really important, depending on the type of organization. Particularly if you've got buildings or areas that do a similar role, but are maybe located in a different part of the site. We had one building a few years ago where there was effectively a main running in, it teed off, and then went into two buildings that were identical and had similar numbers of staff in more often than not. And one of the buildings was using 30% more than the other one. And we're like, well, it shouldn't be. You could understand some variation in there, but not 30%. That was a bit too much. And what we found was there was actually another pipe that came off. There was a cap end on it. I think they were going to build three buildings originally. That had kind of come off. It wasn't fully off, thankfully, but there was water coming out, and that was what was leading that 30% extra. Um, and in fairness on that one, they managed to find that out by just doing weekly reads. So that was a nice one. But if they'd had AMR in there, they would have seen it running overnight as well, and it would have been like, well, there's no why is the water coming out of that building and there isn't coming out of that? We've obviously got an issue. It would have just helped them focus their attention on that. Um, yeah, as I said, you can break businesses down into areas or buildings themselves and compare. And again, it's like by having that data, you can just start spotting some unusual consumptions as well, which is important. Um, by collecting this data as well, if you're thinking about implementing a new process or a new strategy or something of that nature, what you can do is you can compare pre and post. So again, if you've got that data, you can do a very simple, we were using X meters cubed per day per person before we put this in, and now we're using 25% less because I've got the numbers to compare. So really important from that point of view. Don't forget your effluent data. As I said, I will stress this. Um, you can get loggers that will measure your effluent going out as well on a volume basis, as well as like auto samplers and all that sort of thing to see what the constituent parts of it are. So that's something just to be aware of. It's not done all too often, but it is something that can be done. Um, Keep your bills handy as well. That's another thing. A lot of the time bills just kind of go into the finance team, and unless you've got a really, really diligent finance team looking at things and comparing against the last time, you might not pick something up from a bill if it doesn't come directly to the people who are generally responsible for the management of those buildings. So if you can request copies, it's like, yeah, I'd like a copy of that data, and then at least you're getting that consumption between those 2 points in time. And again, that could easily be put into a spreadsheet and compared. But it's always handy to have, and it'll have your effluent data on there as well. So again, you keep track of that. Um, for effluent as well, regular sampling is always a good idea, particularly of the a normal process. A lot of the time, what we find with effluent consents is people they've either been set at a level which is too high, or and that could be from a range of things. Either it needed to be high. Back in the day, but you've put some processes in place which have actually reduced it, or people have kind of thought, oh, I'm a bit worried about this, so I'll kind of over egg it a little bit, and that all just costs money. So if you're taking regular sampling, you might be able to see an opportunity to reduce down there on the costs as well. Um, if you're doing any changes to the process, it might be worth doing some sampling campaigns. Again, if you put something in place and it's made a marked improvement, it might be one of those things where say you manage to take it from your consent level down to 25% of your consent level. You might not want to take it down to there, because then you might have a worry that, well, what happens if something changes or we have a problem and it breaches? But you could bring it down to maybe 50%. You give yourself another 100% difference on what you're actually outputting, as a kind of an insurance, but you're not paying for that other bit as well, so you can save a little bit of money there. So important to just pay attention to it. And as I've said, you can put volumetric monitors in this as well to manage that as well. So once you've collected all your data, as part of this, you can start analyzing it, and that'll take you through to here. So the good thing about having data is you can start doing some benchmarking, as I mentioned. So you can benchmark yourself against last year or maybe last month. You need to always be aware of variations if you're doing it monthly, to make sure that that isn't the cause of it. If a school looked at its water consumption in June and then compared it in July, it might look significantly less in July, but the school may have been closed for those 2 weeks at the back end of July during the summer holiday. It's certainly between July and August that you would expect to see a marked difference. But benchmarking is always a good thing to have there. You can also start to benchmark against those in your industry. There's plenty of data out there. I think most of it's free, but you can get out there and sort of say, well, if I don't know, if you were an office building of 50 people, there's generally data out there that says, an office is maybe, I think it's about, I think they say a good is about 50 liters per head per day, for an office, a typical office setting. If you're using 30, then, I mean, which would be quite a significant reduction. But if you're using 30, you say, well, we're really doing quite well here. Or if you're using 100, you think, oh, we're using kind of twice as much as what we're expecting. So something to pay attention to. And again, what are your trends in your usage? That's quite important for these things. Again, you can use that data, as I said, to do these kind of costs per head is quite a traditional one to do, particularly for kind of office situations. But you can also do sort of unit manufactured. We always use the word widgets. So how many meters cubed of water do I use per widget or per 1,000 widgets, whatever it is? And then is that getting worse? Is it getting better? Has the thing that I've put in place made a reduction, or has it actually increased? But without that data, you wouldn't be able to do it. And you do need to do that analysis on it. Otherwise, you'll not be able to move on to the next step. And again, you'll be able to notice if you've got any unusual consumption. Am I using water at night when I don't think I should be? If I've got EMR in there, you'll be able to see, well, there shouldn't be any water used. Well, whatever you're using, again, zero is your difference. It's probably a leak or something like that. Maybe it's a bit of a process that's running that doesn't need to be running at that time. And again, are you on the right effluent tariff for what you're doing? So these are all things that can kind of play into this part. Um, there's also that there's always this kind of opportunity around, can you generate your own? It's not as easy as people might think, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't look at it as a viable option. Rainwater harvesting. Have you got lots of roof space? That's great, but is that where you're actually going to use the water? We've had numerous occasions where we've went and looked at a site and they've had a really big kind of flat roof area that's just going to catch lots of water. That would be ideal for collecting and whatever, but then they needed the water 100 yards up the site, and it was up a hill, at which point, once by the time you put a pump in there to pump it, it's probably cheaper to get it from the mains. So again, all these things play into it, but it's all worth knowing. So optimize. I think this one can sometimes be characterized as your opportunity. So you've kind of understood what it is you're trying to achieve. You've collected your data on that to support your kind of hypotheses and where you want to go. You've then analyzed that data as well to kind of really tease out, is there anything else I can do? Do I need to go back and rethink about my objectives? Do I need to add anything in? Actually, I never thought about the opportunity of generating our own, and that's something we could maybe build into this. And then you would kind of go back in the circle of, well, do I have the data to look at that? But this is your opportunity. So it's now your time to make changes. So if you think for EMR, for instance, like I mentioned before, you make that change, you put a new process in place. You still want to have that data around it, but this is the time to, you've moved on to this bit, and kind of like, this is the fun bit. This is the bit where I get to make a change and see what happens. You may want to make these incremental as well. It depends on what you're going back to your objectives, what you're trying to achieve. If you're looking for a specific thing and you change 3 variables, how do you know which variable it was that was the thing that made the material change? It may be like that, or you may just want to make a change, and that's absolutely fine. But just a thing to kind of have floating around in your head of like, which way does this fit in? As part of that as well, you'll kind of want to know which ones are going to make the biggest returns on investment. That's often the way that we judge the changes that we put in. We spend X, what did it generate, or how long will it take to cover the cost of doing that? But again, these are the things, once you've made these, you can start calculating these numbers, which is great. And again, how much are you going to need to invest as well? So, you kind of need to have these things in your mind, kind of probably before you make these changes, but it will help form part of that decision. And then validate, which is a bit that kind of if you haven't got your data, you're not going to be able to validate. So where I mentioned before about, say having an AMR installed, and say maybe you get that installed 3 months before you do anything. So you've got a nice good chunk of data, and you know that your kind of variations are going to be fairly constant throughout the year. And you say, right, I'm going to make this change. I've made the change. Go back to the data now, and it's like, is there a material change? Like I thought this might save us about 15, 20%. Does it save you that 15 or 20%? You're never going to know without the data at the front end, but you have to validate to prove that point as well. Um, at this point, it's really human behavior is a fantastic thing. The world would be certainly a much more boring place if we were all the same. But it does play a massive role, particularly in utility usage. Water is obviously one of them, but like gas and electricity is another one. Um, when these initiatives are normally launched, there's quite a bit of fanfare. You've done that due diligence at the front end. You've got your senior management buy-in. It obviously it kind of it generally feeds into people's ESG and net zero targets and things of that nature. So there's generally quite a bit of like, oh yeah, we're going to retry this, and there's lots of comms and information posters go up and all that sort of thing, and that's brilliant. That's great. So generally, I mean, there's always going to be a percentage of people who just don't get engaged, and there's nothing you can really do about that. But generally most people will be engaged at that point, which is great because you'll start to see those improvements. Um, Over time, that'll wane as the general humdrum and day-to-day life gets involved, and things at home and things at work and challenges and all that sort of thing, and it distracts people from thinking about that initiative that you're trying to put forward. Oops. um, and you'll see a drop off. You'll see this kind of this graph go up, and then it'll go down, or it'll go down actually, and then it'll start creeping back up if you're doing it from a consumption point of view. Um, and this is where it's really important that you kind of continually promote, use your communications effectively, reporting back to managers so they can talk about it as well. And what you'll see on there is you'll start to see it come back into where it should be, and you'll probably get this undulation. So you'll start off here, you put it in, you start using a little bit less water, people take their eye off the ball, it starts coming back up, you redo your comms, and it comes like this. But as long as you're kind of looking at that data and you've got access to it, which is why that data is so important, you can see that starting to happen. You think, right, okay, I've got to really re-push this again, and it can really make a big difference. And as I say, the cycle's constantly there because, as we all know, we'll have a great couple of weeks where everything's going well, and then all of a sudden, like feels like the world's ended, and water's the last thing that you're thinking about. So it's always good to kind of keep it at the front of mind and keep pushing those comms out if you can. So we get to live, die, repeat. So this is something that kind of can continually cycle. Um, so as you're kind of going through it, it's kind of like you've 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 defined what it is that you want to achieve, and sometimes we have to start small to build that buy-in. So we might go at that first time to go and speak to senior management, and um, you might get a bit of buy-in, but there might be a kind of, well, we don't really have that much resource, or we don't have that much money to do this. So you think, right, okay, I need to start on something small, low-hanging fruit, something that I can show a real impact with. Um, and then, you can kind of prove that when you get through the rest of the cycle. You then go away, you collect your data as part of your process. Um, you carry out the analysis on that data to show what opportunities you've got, or you potentially have. You optimize based on the opportunities you've got. So that's where you're implementing these initiatives that you think are going to make the difference. Um, and then what you do is you then look at your data again and you validate those goals against what you thought it was going to be, to prove your outcome. And hopefully you get a bit of a better number than you hoped for. And then that maybe gets you that buy-in with senior management again to kind of go and say, like, I've got this other idea that I want to do. And because you've proved something, you get to do maybe something slightly bigger, or you just get like a bit more resource to go and push that into a further area of your business. Or if you're managing multiple sites, maybe push it out to all of them. So unadulterated sales pitch. Obviously, it has to come. But how can we sort of support your total water solutions? So for understanding, every business is different and it has different priorities. We fully understand that, and it can be a challenge if you haven't done this before. There's no sort of you know procedure that would kind of guide you down the right path. We can help you, like work with you to look at forming those objectives and teasing out what it is you're trying to achieve, and we can support you along the way in that as well. We do various sort of audits and things of that nature, which um, can start building out those objectives for you. You might have like a rough idea of what you want to do, but you might want to bring an expert in to kind of really tease out what those differences are, and kind of steal some of their expertise and history and things that they've done at other sites and things like that. So that can be quite important as well. Um, Data collection. So as I mentioned, automated meter reading's a really simple one. It's fairly inexpensive. And 15-minute data 24/7, 365. So you've got that data before, you've got that data during, you've got that data afterwards. And you can jump into there every now and again. You can see changes in basically real time just about. Submetering as well. So if you've got multiple buildings or you want to submeter a particular building, that's the type of thing we can come in and help you with. And again, automated meter reading could be put on those submeters as well. So you can kind of you can break it down into sections. So you've got separate data as well, which can be really important to start narrowing down focuses or trying to understand why something hasn't worked or why something's working a lot better than what you thought it would. We can look on the positives. Sampling. So when we're talking about effluent again, which we need to keep coming back to, we've got some labs north and south. We can do sample and analysis on your effluent just to make sure if you're doing any new projects, that the changes that you've made are having a positive effect on having an alternative effect that you didn't realize. We had a great example of um, this more for the men in the room, so excuse me. But when most service stations now have waterless urinals in them, which is a great idea. They save about 100,000 liters of water, I think is the normal thing that they say per year. However, what that can do is it can lead to an increased concentration of ammonia in the effluent. And we had a one where they had like a little packaged water treatment plant on the back end of it because it wasn't connected to any services. And basically they were failing the consent because the ammonia was too high because it wasn't getting diluted by the water. And they actually had to go back and put in water urinals to get over that. But again, luckily as part of that we were doing sampling and we noticed that before it got into too big of a problem. Analyze. So yeah, various water audits. So as part of that, kind of we can help you form the bits at the front end. We can do the full audit for you as well. Look at water and effluent, what the options are you treating it in the right way, is there alternatives to doing that, and that's all done through a um, like a bespoke audit. There could be simple desktop audits as well, where we just look at some bills and do some analysis and benchmark you against other people. We used to do we used to do red, amber, green on the top of them to kind of help people, and that ended up being a bit of a misnomer. Everybody concentrated on the color and didn't look at the data inside of it. So we've stopped doing that now as a way of supporting customers in a weird way. But we can do full in-depth audits as well, where we come in that process of like looking at water coming in, what happens with it, is there the option to generate your own, and how are you getting rid of whatever comes out the back end of it. We can look at that. Um, Optimize. So we do this through it's called situational targeted pathway. What that does is it means that we can say, well, look, these are your options. This is what we think it would save you. These are the potential estimated costs within about 20-30%. So it's not a finger in the air. It'll give you a bit of an idea, but it's not necessarily concise. And then from there, you can say, well, actually, that would be the option that I want to go down, and then we can take it down that way. So you're not like just getting a audit that just, that's the standard audit. It's like very much what are you trying to achieve, and we'll go down that path with you, and we'll always give you support, but also a bit of challenge as well. Like, are you sure that's exactly the right way you want to go? I think this might be a better idea. Have we thought about this? So that's where that like kind of expertise and experience comes in. Again, we can look at those alternative water sources. Is it feasible? Is the first point. Do you have the chance to collect grey water? Sorry, rainwater, and then do you have a lot of things on site where there's grey water being used? So sinks, taps, showers, things of that nature. Could any of that be recycled and reused going forward? Um, we could also carry out remedial work. So, if you've done part of your project and you think, well, actually, we thought we were going to save water here, but we've actually noticed that we've got a leak on site. That's the type of thing where we can come in from a commercial point of view, locate where the leak is, dig down, fix the pipe, replace it, whatever it needs, to save you on that. And the good thing is as well, if you've got that data in the front end, you know how much you're actually losing from a leak. A lot of the time leaks go and it's quite difficult to estimate the volume that you're losing. So, like putting a clamp on it, for instance, it's like you can't really measure that beforehand. If you've got an AMR unit or so, or you've been taking your daily meter readings, even that would be good enough. If the leak gets fixed, then you can say, well, actually, we were using 10 meters cubed a day, and now we're using 8. We've saved 2 meters cubed a day, and that has a monetary value, which you can then sort of, you can use on that. Validate. We can help you through this whole process. As I say, we can follow up with like an audit on the back end as well, where you say, well, we've done all this, blah blah blah, we've proved it. And we can support you with that. The other things we can support with as well is I think I've got it on here. Yeah, presentations to management team, on further initiatives or the initial one. We're as I say, we're experienced. We've been doing this for quite a while, so we kind of we know how to deliver those presentations quite effectively. So if that's something where maybe as you feel you need a bit of support, we can help with that as well. But obviously more than happy to fit in with however you want to do your project. It's yours at the end of the day. We're just there to support. And I think that takes us to the end. There hasn't any questions come up in the Q&A. That's absolutely fine. If you type them in furiously now, that's fine. We can hang around for a bit. But I understand that obviously on a lot of these things, what I'm trying to do really is just trying to help you have a framework to think about these things. And from that, you're the person who understands your business and organization and what will work and what won't work. It's just to give you some pointers on, oh, I never thought about that, and or maybe I could implement this, which is great. And sometimes those questions don't come until after the fact of the webinar. So if you've got any questions at all, you've got my contact details. You can drop me an email. I'm more than happily, we can have a Teams call one-on-one. If you're close by, I can drop in, and we can talk through these things in person. If you're trying to start something, so don't feel shy about asking questions after the fact. But if there's no questions come through, I think we'll call that a day. You've stayed with us for quite a period of time, and just again from me, just a really big thank you. I really do appreciate you spending the time to sit and listen to me chat on for a little bit. But if we can help you, you know where we are. More than happy to do so, and thank you again.